So I've got a clip here. I want to get some commentary back from Tim and Paul on this one. It's retired U.S. Army Colonel Douglas McGregor. He went on the news and he told the truth about what led up to the Russia-Ukraine conflict and what happened. So let me just throw this up on the screen. Let me know if you guys can't hear this. Just hit play here, and
here is Colonel Doug
can you guys hear
McGregor,
that?
a former senior advisor
Okay.
to the Secretary of Defense. Thank you for joining us. Why do you think Putin is doing this? What is his end game?
Well, Vladimir Putin is carrying through on something that he's been warning us about, at least for the last 15 years, which is that he will not tolerate U.S. forces or their missiles on his borders, much as we would not tolerate Russian troops and missiles in Cuba. And we ignored him, and he finally acted. He was not going to allow Ukraine under any circumstances to join NATO. And what's happened now is that the battle in eastern Ukraine is really almost over. All the Ukrainian troops there have been largely surrounded and cut off. You have a concentration down in the southeast of 30 to 40,000 of them. And if they don't surrender within the next 24 hours, I suspect that the Russians will ultimately annihilate them. That's why Zelensky is meeting with Putin's representatives right now. The game is over. And he's going to have to negotiate the best deal he can get. And we've already told him, the President of the United States has, that if he opts for neutrality for Ukraine, we'll back him. And I think that Vladimir Putin will do that for Western Ukraine. That is the Ukraine beyond the Dnieper River. But behind it in the east, where he is now, I'm not sure what he has planned there, whether he forms another republic, annexes it into Russia, because historically it has been Russian. But the territory west of Ukraine is not. He knows that, and he's happy to live with that as a neutral state.
I am not a military expert. I'm not even an expert on geography. But if he takes Ukraine and Ukraine abuts Poland, then he's going to have a NATO country abutting him. So if that's what he doesn't want, then isn't he going to just have to keep going until he runs out of NATO countries?
I guess I should say it again. He has no interest in crossing the Dnieper and heading west to the Polish border.
So Tim, what are your thoughts on that clip?
Yeah, that's what I was saying at the beginning. I want to reach, if he'd stopped with the eastern states, one of the things we have to, and I think that's what you want to do, stop with the eastern states. I'm just going to take those. I'm going to annex these things. I'm happy. The thing about it is, the Monroe Doctrine, when was that going back to now? It was after the Second World War. That's what prevented, that's what the Cuban Missile Crisis was about, wasn't it? It was stopping, if I remember correctly here, and don't get me wrong, I could be inaccurate, but that was stopping anyone putting any missile systems or anything on Western territory in effect. That's what Monroe Doctrine said. And of course, I'm not saying we tend to be holier than thou, don't we, in the West, thinking that we're not ever the aggressor, always.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, right. And just like with being economically aggressive is still aggressive.
Well, is it, if not more so? I mean, people still die. We just
Right.
don't. It's not blown apart. They're just not fed, or this kind of thing. And they
Right.
just die most horrible
Exactly.
deaths. So you're absolutely right. And I think if you have to look at Ukraine as well as being the breadbasket of Europe. I mean, the mineral wealth of that country is staggering. I mean, the oil and gas there and everything else is huge.
Yes.
I'm not saying that's a thing that he's wanting. We've already discussed about the population loss and everything else that he had, but it's a very valuable country. And of course, I'm not even, see, I'll tell you the whole thing about this that I find quite interesting. You become almost like a Putin apologist by accident. And yet we're not. We're just trying to be rational about it. We're just trying to say, look, if you're going to be the aggressor the whole time, you're going to get, it's like in the playground, you walk around punching people in the face. At some point, someone's going to punch you back. If you take it from the Russian perspective and you look at Syria and Libya and you look at Iraq, and you literally sit back there, and I know he was supportive in certain actions within those conflicts. I remember when I was stepping into Iraq I only went in on the 2003 through 2007 bit. And I remember we had a lawyer come to we were operating on an old UN mandate, and the lawyer came to the squadron and said, if you drop any weapons, and I never did, and I'm very fortunate I didn't, taught many people to do that, but I never did it myself. If you do drop, your actions are indefensible currently under the mandate we have. And that's what we were told before we went out there, one of the first ones in Iraq. I mean, how hostile is that as an aggressive actorage to go into these countries and to think that we know better than they do?
Yeah.
Paul, go ahead.
Oh, well, yeah. So, that assessment's pretty good because he does want to restore old borders because of natural geographical, like the river, for example. If you start looking at where the old borders were, there were natural geographical defense mechanisms, body of water, some elevation or whatever, mountain type thing, like whatever. And I'm not really great on the geography, but if you start going through it, that's what you'll see. And the new borders leave basically open territory that they don't have the resources or manpower to protect. And so that's part of it. And then, he's saying, I don't want missiles, but we're not necessarily pushing to do that. It's again, goes back to the way that they view the world is these guys are economically aggressive and we're a poor country because of them. And therefore we need to use military leverage in order to negotiate these things. They need to have negotiating power with the prices of their resources because of that. They don't understand. They don't think like we do as capitalists, which is, okay, let's let free market diversify an economy. So we're not just trading two things. You know what I mean? Let's work trade deals and let's have a diverse economy, because that's how you climb out of a financial hole. They don't see it that way. In case in point is the government runs their companies, the major companies, the government just runs it. So they don't understand free market, free enterprise, or at least they don't respect it like we do, because the people in power benefit from not having it that way to a degree, right? Because they take that money. And so they're not understanding like, well, we can get out of economic poverty this way and be better trade partners. The way that their ideology is, well, they're thinking just in terms of force and territory and land space and people, and then, hey, we could just say Ukrainian sovereignty really doesn't exist. That we'll make that up now, even though, of course, obviously the Ukrainians are very motivated to not be owned by Russia, but they'll just say that's part of the campaign and try to move those borders back, fight for something called indivisibility of security, which means that, we keep things even and we don't put weapons on each other's borders, and to halt NATO, because NATO expansion means they lose military leverage, which means then they lose any kind of economic leverage that they have, which isn't very much. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Here, let me get these super chats, and I got another clip I want to get some feedback from you guys on. Competent Man's talking about Article 5, mutual defense. Yeah, so we covered that. Revenge imperialism, that's what it is. Steve says just looking to get the band back together again. Part of it, yeah. 22 Ruskies reunion tour shirt on sale here. Okay, so I've got this other clip here, and I think this guy's an analyst or a professor, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just throw it up on the screen. This is from March 1st. So some of this stuff is slightly dated, but again, tell me if you guys can't hear this. I can switch over, but which one is this here on my tabs? This guy. Okay, here we go. And
but I actually think that what's going on here is that the West is leading.
By the way, I think this clip here is from 2014-15.
Yeah, it's back from that.
Ukraine down the primrose path. And the end result is that Ukraine is going to get wrecked. And I believe that the policy that I'm advocating, which is neutralizing Ukraine and then building it up economically and getting it out of the competition between Russia on one side and NATO on the other side, is the best thing that could happen to the Ukrainians. What we're doing is encouraging the Ukrainians to play tough with the Russians. We're encouraging the Ukrainians to think that they will ultimately become part of the West, because we will ultimately defeat Putin and we will ultimately get our way. Time is on our side. And of course, the Ukrainians are playing along with this. And the Ukrainians are almost completely unwilling to compromise with the Russians and instead want to pursue a hardline policy. Well, as I said to you before, if they do that, the end result is that their country is going to be wrecked. And what we're doing is, in effect, encouraging that outcome. I think it would make much more sense for us to work to create a neutral Ukraine. It would be in our interest to bury this crisis as quickly as possible. It certainly would be in Russia's interest to do so. And most importantly, it would be in Ukraine's interest to put an end to the crisis. Thank you.
Thoughts on that, Tim?
Yeah, his actual speech is about an hour 15 minutes long. It's worth watching the whole thing. He's there's a couple of experts that have come out. Obviously 3 experts are here, right? We could just be guys sat around a chicken wing bar, couldn't we, being experts and stuff with a few beers. But there's other experts apparently that have studied their whole life who reckon they know better than us. How that is. But
I
yeah,
hope
who
so.
are they anyway? Yeah, hopefully there are.
God, I hope so. Yeah.
If we're in charge, it'd be a lot worse than this, believe me. Probably a lot more fun. But yeah, so that guy is worth watching him, and I can't remember his name. He's a pretty decent dude, pretty worth finding out. Rachel, put a link in the description here, because he does explain how the West kind of led to this, really, and I can kind of see that. Oh, it's interesting as well, and I know we're going to probably get onto it at some point, Rich, but the weakness or the perceived weakness of someone like the perceived weakness of the West by someone like Putin, of course, who is trying to restore the USSR to pre kind of Yeltsin days, and that's going back. I think he's always hung up on the fact that the strength, he felt it was a superpower, wasn't it, when it was USSR? There's only two superpowers in the world, of which he was one, and now he's not really a superpower, either by GDP or anything else, or military might. It's embarrassing for him what's happening right now, of course, that it hasn't just happened very quickly. It hasn't been a blitzkrieg, and he's in Kiev and installing power. That hasn't happened. Right. And I think he's very, an ego like that is very delicate and very wounded. You know, the West is very good at promising people, as Paul was saying earlier, a lot of things, and then not delivering. Things happen. We have governments that last for 3 years, for example. How long's Putin been in power for now? I have to go back and try and work that one out.
He's one of the longest standing people in power, I think.
There's a video clip somewhere of him with every American president for like since George Bush, I think one or two.
Yeah, must have been.
Yeah.
It was Medvedev, wasn't he? He swapped positions with Medvedev, didn't he? And then swapped back again after he changed the constitution to allow him to stay in further. So he has been part of that infrastructure post Yeltsin for many, many years. And of course, a guy like that who feels he is probably the father of Russia, and he's rebuilding it in the image, the Tsarist imperialism as it probably used to be, and he has talked about that in the past, of course, quite considerably. You can understand that for him, it doesn't seem like he's doing anything aggressive. He's just trying to reestablishing the borders that worked when the country was great, and of course, it's almost it's almost understanding for a historian. I think David Starkey was saying something very similar to this. The British historian we had was saying something very similar. It's understandable. Just for us, wrapped up in our very short-term Western ways, we see it as a supreme act of aggression against a sovereign state, which of course it is. Mm-hmm. But how far historically do you want to go back? How far do we go back?
Well, that's always the argument, though, and that they like to make. Any of these sort of dictators like to make when they invade someone is like, well, 100 years ago it was like this, so we're gonna go in now and take it back. Like, hey man, it's not 100 years ago. We're now, and now Ukraine is a sovereign nation with people and families that are running their own system. You don't just go in there and take their stuff because even 20, 30, whatever, old Soviet Union, how many years ago, a few decades ago, it was different back then. Like, that's like your girlfriend breaks up with you and remarries, and you kick the door in and you grab her and take her back because 10 years ago we were in a relationship. You're coming with me. It's like that's not reality or where we're at now, but we know that. But that's the argument they like to present.
But Paul, we have to look at this in a context as well. I mean, my house is older than your entire country, and I'm not being funny. It was built in 1500. Don't get me wrong. It's my grandma's older than America, but from his context, Russia is foundational. It goes back and back and back. There's a huge amount of history there, and of course, he sees the imbalance. He sees the naivety of America, and I'm not saying that at all. Don't get wrong, but he looks at it very differently than how we look at it. And of course,
for sure.
It's just I think if we were in his position, we'd be looking at it going, what's gone wrong here? You can literally see. I think he did a conference with the oligarchs, didn't he, after this, and you could see him sitting there. And every other conference, I believe, after that, his voice wasn't used. It was a narrator. But that particular one, you can find it, the conference with the oligarchs post the invasion. He sat there and his voice was fragile. And he realized, I think, he pushed a bad position. He just crashed the economy 30%. And this dude's sitting next to people where he realizes all of a sudden he's not the biggest dog in the pound anymore. There's people there that could kill him. Like, there are literally very wealthy people, and he's just destroyed their hereditary wealth. It's like, this is familial wealth he's got rid of now. And they're going to have to rebuild this. And they're looking at him. You see the stares. They're like, what did you do that for? Like, what was that about? And of course, they know it's about ego and everything else. And as far as they're concerned, they just want to make sure their wife gets down to Croatia for a holiday, and she's giving him stick now. It's it's a very difficult thing, but
Oh no, and that's, you make a great point there, Tim. Is that we're dealing with fundamentally different ways of looking at the world here, and that's something to always keep in mind and try to see it from the other person's perspective, so that we can figure out the best strategy if we're in a position. I'm not in a position to figure out anything other than my what I'm going to do this afternoon. But if I were in that position, I want to know that perspective. And sometimes I think there's a lack of that. We see it in things like, Afghanistan is a great example. The people of Afghanistan and that leadership think different, and they were still human beings. We're more alike than we are different, but there are certain fundamental ways of thinking and ideology that makes us different in how they approach a problem. And so we have to understand that in order to understand, okay, why, what are his motivations? Why is he doing this? And then, well, how can we solve this without using Ukraine as a place to stack bodies? You know what I mean? How can we do this in a way that we can sort of, everybody kind of gets some sort of win out of it, or feels like they are at least, again, without running a proxy war of insurgents out of Ukraine for the next 20 years or whatever. And so, that's the thing. It's really important to ask ourselves these questions. What are these different individuals thinking? Not just what they're saying to try to convince the public, but how do they view the world? You know what I mean?
Hey guys, I really hope that you enjoyed that short clip. If you did, consider supporting the creation of content by checking out my supplement line. Pinned in the top comment below of this video in the comments, there's a link to the unpluggedalpha.com/shop. When you click through, you'll be able to land over here, and the entire lineup is broken down by category that it performs best in: estrogen metabolism, fat burning, your foundational essentials for health, immune health, performance, and testosterone support. If you check out with coupon code ALPHA10, you'll get 10% off on your first order. There's also the option to use the subscribe and save model, where regular shipments will be sent over to you on a regular basis, and that gives you a little bit of a discount, and your supplement facts are always broken down over here. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys have an awesome day. And again, check out that link. It's pinned in the top comment below in this video. Peace out.